The desert wind whistled low across the barren flats, carrying grit and silence in equal measure. The sun, hanging swollen and red, was just dipping toward the jagged teeth of the mountains. Heat still radiated from the earth, shimmering off the dust-choked trail that wound its way into the horizon. On that trail rode Eli Carter, a weather-worn rancher with shoulders broad as split-rail fence posts and eyes the color of storm clouds. His horse, a rangy dun gelding named Bramble, plodded along steady, head bobbing with the rhythm of hooves on dirt. Eli had been on the trail since dawn, hauling supplies back from Silver Veen, a town that looked more dead than alive, its saloon doors swinging with more ghosts than drinkers these days. Eli wasn't a man given to words. His neighbors, the few who hadn't been driven out by drought or bandits, called him steady, maybe too steady, stone-faced, carrying the weight of silence like another saddlebag. He ran the Three Pines Ranch alone now, ever since fever had taken his wife 3 winters ago. That loss had carved something out of him, left hollows where laughter once lived. He was 2 miles out from his ranch fence line when he spotted it, a burlap sack. It lay slumped beside a mesquite bush, tied with rope at the top, moving just slightly in the wind. At first Eli thought it was just some trader's trash blown off a wagon, but then the sack shifted. Not with the breeze, but with weight inside. Bramble snorted. Eli slowed him to a stop. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching gravel, spurs chiming faintly. He stepped closer, his hand instinctively brushing the colt at his hip. The sack was large, big enough to hold a sheep or a half-grown calf. Then came the sound, a muffled whimper. Eli's jaw tightened. He knelt, gloved fingers tugging at the knot in the rope. It was cinched cruelly tight, as if someone had wanted whatever was inside to stay there. He pulled his hunting knife and sliced it clean. The sack sagged open. Inside was a woman. Her wrists were bound, her ankles lashed together, her dress torn at the hem. Dark hair clung to her face, damp with sweat and streaked with dust. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks sunburned raw, and her chest heaved shallow with each desperate breath. Her eyes, green as prairie grass after rain, fixed on Eli with a pleading that went straight through him. "Please." Her voice rasped, broken from thirst. "Take them off." She twisted her wrists, showing the rope cutting deep into skin. For a long moment, Eli just stared. He had seen plenty of cruelty on the frontier, but something about this, the sheer savagery of leaving a woman trussed up in the desert to die, made his blood burn. He cut her bonds quickly. The rope fell away and she groaned as blood returned to her hands. She tried to stand but stumbled. Eli caught her, steadying her against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, bones and grit like a bird half-starved. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low even. Her eyes flickered, fear shadowing them. "Men, 3 of them. Took me from the stage. Said they'd come back." Eli's jaw clenched. "Bandits." The territory had been crawling with them since the sheriff in Silver Vine lost half his deputies to gunfire and the rest to fear. Outlaws ran the trails now, preying on travelers. He looked back at Bramble. The gelding stamped impatiently, as if sensing the shift in the air. Eli knew what this meant. If the men who tied her meant to return, then trouble was already riding his way. He lifted the woman gently, setting her across Bramble's saddle. She clung weakly, lips trembling with exhaustion. "You'll be safe at my ranch," Lee said, more promise than hope. Her name, he learned on the slow ride back, was Clara Jameson. She spoke in broken whispers, telling him fragments. How she'd boarded the stage in Santa Fe, bound for a cousin in Silver Vein after her father's death. How 3 masked men had stopped the coach on the open trail. How they'd killed the driver, dragged her screaming from her seat and bound her up like cargo. Eli listened, saying little, but inside his chest a storm built. He could picture them. Wolves in dusters, pistols drawn, laughing as they stuffed her into a sack. Men like that didn't deserve daylight. By the time the ranch house came into sight, a lonely shape of weathered wood under the shadow of Three Pines Ridge, Clara had fallen into a half-conscious daze. Eli carried her inside, laid her on his late wife's bed, and fetched water from the well. She drank greedily, tears slipping down her face as she choked on the coolness. "Easy," Eli murmured, holding the tin cup steady. For the first time since his wife's passing, the sound of another's breath filled his home. But peace didn't last. That night, as the desert cooled and coyotes yipped at the moon, Eli saddled his rifle and set it by the door. He sat at the table, listening to the wind whistle through the boards, watching the horizon from the window. He knew men like the ones Clara described. They wouldn't leave unfinished business. And he was right. Near midnight, the sound came, hooves faint but growing. Eli stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Out across the flats, 3 riders moved like shadows against the pale sand. They were coming straight for his ranch. Eli Carter had no interest in dying, but if death came riding in, it was going to find him standing. He spat into the dirt, worked the lever on his Winchester, and waited. The night was still but for the drumming of hooves. 3 riders, dark against the pale desert, pushed closer to the ranch with the confidence of wolves circling a lone cabin. Their laughter carried faintly on the wind, cruel and mocking, like coyotes testing the edge of firelight. Eli Carter leaned against the porch post, Winchester steady in his calloused hands. His gaze was cold, calculating. He'd stood guard before, against rustlers, against storms, against his own emptiness, but this was different. Tonight death had a direction, and it was coming fast. Behind him through the thin cabin wall, he could hear Clara stir. She must have heard the horses too. Her fear was like a second heartbeat in the house, but she stayed quiet. That told Eli something. She wasn't the kind of woman who panicked easy. She'd learned to swallow fear even bound in a sack. That grit might be the only thing keeping her alive. The riders slowed as they neared the ranch yard. The lead outlaw, a thick-set man with a scar running down his cheek like a jagged river, reined in his horse. His hat was pulled low, and the faint glow of moonlight caught on the iron of his pistol. "Well, well?" The scarred man called out, voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like some ranch dog found our lost bundle. You got something belongs to us, friend." Eli didn't move. "She ain't yours." The second man chuckled, a high, nasal sound. "Everything's ours if we take it. That's the law out here." Eli's thumb brushed the rifle's hammer. "Not tonight." The scarred man grinned, flashing yellow teeth. "I reckon you don't know who you're standing against. Name's Jeb Raleigh. My boys and me. We own these trails. You give the girl over, maybe we let you keep breathing." Eli spat into the dust. "I've buried enough rattlers. 3 more won't make a difference." The air snapped tight. Jeb's grin died. He leaned forward in his saddle, hand twitching near his holster. But before steel cleared leather, Eli fired. The Winchester roared, muzzle flash lighting the yard. Jeb's horse screamed, bucking as the bullet tore through its shoulder. The outlaw tumbled, cursing, into the dirt. Chaos erupted. The other 2 drew iron, firing wild at the cabin. Bullets punched splinters from the porch beam, whining past Eli's head. He dropped behind the rail, levered another round, and shot back. One outlaw jerked, clutching his side, and toppled from his horse. The last man, thin as a rail, eyes crazed, spurred hard and circled wide, firing as he rode. His shots shattered the window, glass raining across the bed where Clara had been lying only moments before. Inside, Clara dropped to the floor, heart hammering. She crawled toward the old chest near the wall. She remembered seeing a revolver in there earlier when Eli had fetched blankets. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid, found the cold iron of the Colt, and gripped it tight. Outside, Eli fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Jeb Raleigh had scrambled behind the water trough, spitting curses, pistol ready. The thin rider looped around again, his horse's hooves striking sparks on rock. Eli rose from cover and fired. His shot caught the rider's hat clean off, grazing scalp. The outlaw howled, clutching his head, but stayed in the saddle. "Damn you, Carter!" Jeb bellowed. "You think one man can stand against us? We got more boys coming. You're dead before sunup." Eli's eyes narrowed. That was the truth of it? Where there were 3, there'd be more. Bandits like Raleigh's gang traveled thick as locusts. Tonight was just the beginning. A movement at the cabin door caught Eli's eye. Clara stepped out, barefoot on the porch, the Colt clutched in both hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned hard. "Get back inside," Eli barked. Her voice was steady, though raw from thirst and fear. "I won't be stuffed in a sack again." And with that, she raised the pistol and fired. The shot cracked wild, but it was enough to spook Raleigh's horse, sending the animal rearing. The scarred outlaw stumbled, his cover lost. Eli didn't hesitate. One shot. Raleigh fell back into the dust, his body still. The last outlaw saw it, let out a curse, and turned tail, spurring his horse into the night. The sound of retreating hooves echoed, then faded into the desert silence. Smoke hung in the air, stinging eyes and throat. The yard was littered with the dead. Bramble snorted nervously in the coral, stamping at the scent of blood. Eli lowered the rifle, chest heaving. Clara stood frozen, the pistol trembling in her grip, the weight of what she'd just done sinking in. "It's over," Eli said, his voice low. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. By dawn, buzzards circled the ranch yard. Eli had dragged the bodies out back, covering them with tarps until he could dig a pit. The desert sun was already merciless, and he worked shirtless, sweat carving lines through the dust on his skin. Clara sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees, watching him. She hadn't spoken much since the fight. Her silence wasn't fear, it was something harder, a reckoning. Finally, she asked, "Will they come back?" Eli drove the shovel into the dirt, leaning on the handle. "If Raleigh had more men, they'll want blood for his. Men like that don't forgive. They come back meaner." Clara swallowed. Her green eyes held his. "Then we can't wait here." Eli studied her. There was no weakness in her voice now, only iron. She'd been someone's captive yesterday, but today she was something else. A woman with fire in her chest, unwilling to be broken again. "Where would you go?" he asked. "Silver Vein. My cousin's there, if I can make it to him." She stopped, as if realizing the town's law was thin as smoke. "Unless," She glanced at Eli, searching. Unless you know another way. Eli looked toward the horizon. The trail east wound through canyons and badlands, crawling with bandits. South led to the border, lawless as a wolf's den. West was desert, death without water. North led to Fort Reliance, where the cavalry kept a thin hold on order. If Clara could reach that, she might have a chance. But the road was long, and Raleigh's gang would be hunting. He should have sent her on alone, washed his hands of it. She wasn't his responsibility. Yet as he looked at her, at the bruises on her wrists and the stubborn lift of her chin, something in him shifted. The silence he'd lived with for years cracked, and a voice inside whispered, "Don't let her fall." Ali wiped his brow. "Set the shovel down. You won't make it alone. I'll ride with you." Clara blinked, relief flooding her face, though she tried to mask it with composure. "Why? You don't even know me." Li's eyes were steady, storm gray. "Don't need to. I know what kind of men tied you up in that sack. That's enough." 2 days later, they were on the trail. Eli rode Bramble, Clara on a paint mare he kept in the corral. She wasn't a practiced rider, but she learned quick, and grit carried her where skill failed. They kept to dry washes and rocky ridges, staying clear of the open flats where riders could be spotted miles off. At night, they camped beneath the stars, fire kept low. Eli cooked beans and coffee, Clara listening to the coyotes yipping far off. She spoke little of her past, only that her father had been a miner, struck rich for a season, then drank himself into ruin. She'd known little but hardship. Eli offered nothing of himself unless she asked. When she did, he told her plain, about his wife, about the fever, about the silence that followed. Clara didn't pity him. She only nodded, as if understanding. On the third night, danger found them. They had camped near a dry riverbed, the fire no more than a whisper of flame. The moon hung thin silver. That's when the sound came, distant hoofbeats, faint but closing. Eli rose, rifle in hand. He motioned Clara down low. From the ridge above, riders appeared. 6, torches flaring. Shadows of pistols and rifles glinted in the firelight. Raleigh's men, reinforcements. Clara's breath caught, but Eli's voice was calm, a steady anchor. "Stay close. If it comes to fighting, you run north. Don't look back." But Clara shook her head. "No more running." She gripped the Colt, her green eyes hard as stone. The riders fanned out, encircling the camp like wolves. Their leader, a broad man with a red bandana and cold eyes, called out, "You killed Raleigh, Carter. You think you can snuff out our flame and walk away? We're gonna gut you, and the girl too." Eli stepped forward, rifle ready, silhouetted against the faint firelight. The night exploded in gunfire.